Hi everyone, settle down, take a seat, we've got another Eddie Howe update for you. Today though, I promise things will be different. Right, the Daily Record had quite an interesting update on the Eddie Howe to Celtic chat on Tuesday night, I've just lost track of days. On the day when the Crystal Palace job became available and tens and hundreds and thousands of people went into a bit of a meltdown on social media, convincing themselves that Eddie Howe wouldn't be coming to Celtic, that suddenly Crystal Palace was a more attractive proposition. They moved to quell this chat, the Daily Record. Tuesday night, they had another report out at their usual 10:30 slot, basically saying that Eddie Howe was still in line to be the Celtic manager, that he wants to be the Celtic manager, and perhaps most interestingly, given a bit of a reason for why the deal hasn't gone through yet. They say that Howe is in line for a huge bonus if Bournemouth are promoted to the English Premier League this season while he's still on gardening leave from the club. They reckon that is the reason why Eddie Howe to Celtic hasn't been confirmed yet. Further to this, they then go into more depth about the backroom team that Eddie Howe is looking to bring to join him at Celtic. They include Stephen Purchase and Simon Weatherston, who are coaches at Bournemouth. They also include Bournemouth Technical Director Richard Hughes, and there was also a mention for Peter Grant, former Celtic player, former Celtic coach under the ill-fated Tony Mowbray regime. So lots to unpack there. You probably know a fair bit about Peter Grant. We also did a video pretty recently about Weatherston and Purchase. But what about the guy that we don't really know a great deal about? Richard Hughes. Well, that's what today's video is for. Right, just before we get on with our deep dive into Richard Hughes, I would just like to put out my usual shout for subscribers. If you are one of the now few people, certainly the minority, that watch this channel and haven't yet subscribed, I really would appreciate you taking literally a few seconds out of your day to do it. It would mean the world. Thank you. Right, Richard Hughes was a professional football player. He played for a number of teams. He actually started as a youth player in Italy, strangely enough, with Atalanta. That's just on the outskirts of Milan. Milan is where he lived. He moved there when he was basically young enough to fly with his mum to join his dad and his brother, who already lived out there. He never made it through to the Atalanta first team, moved back to Britain to join the Arsenal Youth Academy, didn't manage to get his break at what was Highbury back then either, but he did go on to have a pretty good career. Played mainly for Portsmouth, that's probably the most notable team, but he did also play 185 times in total for Bournemouth over 2 spells. Also had 5 caps for Scotland in that time as well, although that was the period of time when Stevie Crawford and Kevin Kyle were getting call-ups. Nigel Quashie's another one that I remember from that period. Basically, Scotland were giving call-ups to anyone who fancied playing football. On the topic of Scotland, by the way, well done to the 6 Celtic players who have made it into Steve Clarke's Euro 2020 squad. We're going to cover that extensively over the summer, but well done to those 6. Richly deserved. Back to Hughes, and it was in his spell at Portsmouth under Harry Redknapp where he met Eddie Howe. Now, the pair have known each other since they were teenagers, over 20 years. They've got a really strong relationship, but we will touch on that a little bit more in a minute. A lot of the detail I've got in this video has been acquired from watching a really, really excellent hour-long podcast that was made by Bournemouth and posted on Bournemouth's YouTube channel. I would urge you to check that out. I'm going to link it below if I remember when I'm editing. I'm assuming you'll be able to get it as some sort of just audio form as well on your phone. It is just audio, but it's on YouTube. That's where you can listen to it. I'd love to see Celtic doing stuff like this in future. Getting a sit down with a couple of media people and a high profile figure at the club, going in depth about the job they do at the club. And I really found it fascinating. I've taken a lot of information from it. Basically, Bournemouth are absolute legends. Early on in the interview, Hughes describes his role as technical director at Bournemouth as heading up the recruitment department. So in a nutshell, that is what he does with the Cherries. Another few wee interesting mentions in the interview Mention for the head of domestic scouting, Andy Howe at Bournemouth, who happens to be Eddie Howe's nephew. Perhaps that's one to watch if Eddie Howe does indeed come to Celtic. Hughes also spoke about his relationship with Eddie Howe, both personally and in the workplace, and he said that Eddie Howe would always have the first and the last say on transfers, which I think is interesting. I think you kind of take it for granted at most football clubs that the manager will have the ultimate say over whether to sign a player or not. Not so sure that's always been the case at Celtic over the last few years. I certainly remember Brendan Rodgers commenting on a certain Ukrainian winger saying that he didn't feel we needed any more wingers at the club. It's one to keep an eye on with regards to the relationship between Hughes and Howe if they do indeed come to Celtic. But these two seem to have a really, really strong relationship. He's a Celtic fan as well, and that's not just something that's been put in the media over the last couple of weeks with the idea of him getting the Celtic job. There was an article in the Mirror from 2009. Richard Hughes was at Portsmouth at that stage. They were about to play Rangers in a pre-season friendly, and he came out with all these brilliant quotes about how he'd been a Celtic fan basically from when he was old enough to go to games. He'd been going to Celtic games. He even commented on the fact that his family had some black sheep, mentioning that they were Rangers fans. He actually played against Celtic in a friendly in 2002 at Fratton Park. We won 3-2. He actually came on as a sub that day, and he actually scored into an end filled with Celtic fans. Hughes spoke about the fact that scoring for a team wearing blue shirts, white shorts and red socks against Celtic wasn't his dream scenario, but that he was pleased he'd scored anyway. Also playing in that game, interestingly enough, for Portsmouth, Mark Burchill and a Mr Eddie Howe at centre-back. So Howe has played against Celtic in the past, so has Hughes. Hughes even scored against us. The first report I could see linking Hughes with the role at Celtic was from April the 1st, which I think was the same day that the Eddie Howe stuff surfaced. It wasn't an April Fool's. It came from Ewan Murray at The Guardian, and he seemed to reckon that Hughes was vying with Fergal Harkin for the sporting director role at Celtic. Now, since then, there have been some murmurings that both Harkin and Hughes could move to Celtic, that the club could work out a system where both of these guys come in. And the more I read into it, the more I think that this could be a potential scenario. We touched on earlier in the video how Hughes' remit at Bournemouth was and is to head up the recruitment department. Now, Celtic lost head of football operations Nick Hammond recently, and his main job at the club was to recruit players. So could we see a scenario where Hughes is brought in as a replacement for Hammond to work in tandem with Eddie Howe, while we also have Fergal Harkin coming into the club to fill this new sporting director role? I think ideally you have Eddie Howe coming in, you have him bringing in a couple of the coaches from Bournemouth, maybe someone Scottish based, maybe even John Kennedy, don't all shout at me. Then you could look at someone like Richard Hughes coming in as a recruitment head or whatever role you want to give him, possibly even head of football operations, and then you have Fergal Harkin or someone else as a sporting director. I think that's the dream scenario. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, but it does seem very much like we're waiting on Bournemouth's season ending. It doesn't seem like Bournemouth getting promoted or not getting promoted is going to be a deal breaker at all. It seems more a case of everything being agreed but not being able to be announced until the end of the Bournemouth season. I think Brentford could still get a result against Bournemouth this Saturday, and I then think that Monday the 24th could be Eddie Howe Day, and it could be Eddie Howe Party Day.